Welcome to Ocean Stories, a podcast hosted by me, Lydia Carey,
and me, Sarah Hersping. We may not be marine experts or even professional scuba divers, but we are curious about the ocean and ways to protect it.
Every week, we chat with conservationists, researchers, business owners, and anyone else with an ocean story to tell.
So whether you're a scientist or someone who's simply curious about the big blue, you're in the right spot. We can't save the seas alone,
but we can do it together. Good morning, America, and welcome back to Ocean
Good morning,
Stories.
world.
Oh, good morning, world, because actually, on our last episode, 10% of our listeners were from Germany.
Yeah, I feel like the German, it used to be way higher, but then it dropped off a little bit, which is totally fine. But
was it your German friends?
Yeah, obviously everyone in the beginning was listening, and now it's going down bad, but that's okay. But I saw that, I counted, it was over 50 countries or something that were listening in total.
It's really funny because
wild.
it'll be 1% Japan, 1% Nigeria, 1% South Africa. I'm like, who are you guys? Let's talk. How are you finding this?
So, yeah, honestly, if you are from a country that is not Germany, the US, the UK, Australia, or anywhere else where we have people on from, please reach out to us and tell us how you found us, because that is wild to me. I want to have a list of the less than 1% countries and list them and be like, can you just raise your hand and send us a DM, literally please, because I'm like, what?
Totally. I mean, no matter where you are, what country you're from,
we love you.
We love you.
In this episode, we're talking to someone today who has been podcasting for over 10 years, which is wild. But we were talking about the moment when people reach out and tell you that they're listening, and I'm like, Lydia, is that your friend? And Lydia's like, no, is that your friend? And I'm like, no, I've never heard of this name. And we're like, someone from the outer world has just DM'd us about something that they're listening. I was like, are you kidding me? Because shouts out to our family and friends that have been supporting us so far, but I feel like it's slowly turning and it's more people from the random world. Even though, Lydia, I am in tears. I don't know if you saw the screenshot, but one of your family members commented, Annabelle thinks you would make an awesome dolphin regarding our Q&A.
Yeah, my mom. My mom filled in
so funny.
The little question below the podcast. If you've never seen it before, look right now. Okay, there's a question that says, what did you think of this episode? And in order for it to show up, we have to approve them. It's just a setting with Spotify. And I guess my mom left a comment that said, Annabelle says that Lydia would be a great dolphin. So that's my sister, who is 8 years old. So thank you, Annabelle.
That was just so funny. I was like, we approve.
I thought you were
this needs to be on the episode.
I thought you were going to say about our funniest hate comment of all time, which I actually am getting teary-eyed about how much I laughed at it. We've gotten a few hate comments, not actually hateful, just kind of random people saying random things.
It's mostly on YouTube too. I feel like YouTube is a hateful, LOL hateful place.
Yeah, there's some trolls on there, but our first real hate comment had a major typo, misspelling, and it is so funny.
It said, you guys are dumb. Yeah, it says, you guys are so dumb. And it's so funny, and the video is about us. It's about it's about whales and how we now can potentially talk to whales. It's about this whole AI thing, or are humans going to be able to understand what whales are saying, blah blah. So it's the funniest snippet of us, if I was able to talk to a whale, I would tell them XYZ. And this person is you guys are so dumb. And I was
it's just so
in
funny.
Tears. I could not believe that happened. Honestly, that's my favorite comment ever.
From the dumbest girls with the podcast, we bring you today's episode.
So today we are talking to someone who is a podcast OG. He's been podcasting for 10 years. And then I've been thinking, I was like, okay, 10 years ago, it was 2014. I was still in high school. I don't think that I listened to podcasts. I feel like that was when I got my first iPhone. Well, maybe that was a little later. But I'm like, I listen to music, but I don't think I didn't even know of the concept of a podcast till way later. I wish you could see what your first ever listened to podcast was. I feel like it was way later for me personally. Do you remember your first podcast?
I feel like I really never got into podcasts until college, and I got super into the Daily? The Daily?
Maybe.
There's one like super famous news podcast I used to listen every day because I was like super into knowing everything in the world.
That's so funny.
And it was the Daily. And then
I remember I got
super into this other podcast, The Law of Attraction with Francesca Amber, which I haven't listened in years, so I don't know what's going on with her anymore, but when it first started, I was like super into her quirky, funny ways. I feel like my
friend randomly recommended that, but maybe it was a different one. That's interesting. I didn't really remember. I remember I had like insane podcast phases during the lockdown. I definitely listened to podcasts before, but that's when I like binged listen. Like I would listen day and night, and like one of the biggest ones was How I Built This, and I still love that one so much.
Oh yes,
like,
that one too.
Oh, that's so good. And I'm kind of like bummed out because I feel like there were some of the big companies where I was like losing my bonkers over like being able to listen to the founders. But now I haven't had like, sometimes I look every now and then, but I feel like there hasn't been like one of the big ones where you like, whoa, he's talking to whatever, like
they already got everybody.
Allbirds, Instagram, like, yeah. So, but that was like one of the big ones where I was like, holy crap. And then, what is your current favorite podcast?
Now, what I listen to is like all ocean sustainability related. Like I've been listening to Sustainability in the Sea episodes. Shout out to Carissa. I found this other podcast, Mind Body Planet, with this girl named Crystalline, who I actually want her to come on our podcast and talk to us.
Oh my God, I've just been listening to
like ocean ones. Yeah, of course.
I have honestly, this is a shame on me on my CV here, but I haven't listened to any ocean-related podcasts besides the ones we collaborated with.
I've also been getting really into like the psychology ones, but I don't do that as often because I have to be in a certain mood. But ones that
those
break down,
you like really have
therapy topics.
Yeah, I've been listening to a bunch of German ones again. Like sometimes I just go back to the German ones; they're really comforting. Which is unrelatable to everyone who's listening here. But my OG favorite forever is Darling Shine. I'm obsessed beyond.
Oh yeah, they're a huge inspiration to us. Wait, I just thought of something that I want to say about your German. When I'm scrolling on TikTok and I see Sarah pop up on my feed speaking German, it is the most out-of-body experience for me. I literally just stare at it and I feel like I'm looking at your twin sister.
No, I can totally relate. Even me, it's weird because sometimes when I speak German now, not when I'm like speaking German for more than a day when I go back and visit, but if I have not been speaking German for a long time, which happens if I don't call my parents for a while, oopsies, I will speak like German, but with the English, like with the English flow, if you want to say so, like with the English sing-sang behind it. Yeah. And it sounds so off that I'm like listening back to it and I'm straight up embarrassed. I'm like, I can't even speak my own language anymore. It's horrible. But then another thing, like our new friend, shouts out if you're listening, Elettra, is Italian. But I've never heard her speak Italian. And then the other day I was at a cafe with her and she answers the phone and her mom is on and she just starts speaking Italian. And I had the same thing. I looked at her and I was like, who are you? Like, obviously I knew, but she was just like, you have different personalities in different languages. And I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't know this part of you, which is so funny. And it's the same for me. Like, I literally think I have two full-on different personalities. Not full-on different, but I'm very different in German than I am in English, just because like Germans have such different way of talking and they're like different way of communicating and being, which I am when I'm speaking German, but then now I'm so used to the American way that's me too. Like the, oh my god, how are you? This is so cute. But this is like so stereotypical. But I feel like you know what I mean, especially in California. You're very much like, oh yay, this is so cute, blah blah blah. Germans don't do that. And I don't do that when I speak German. So it's like I genuinely have two personalities, but it's fun. It's fun.
It's fun. So bilingual people amaze me, especially like how you and other bilingual people are fully, I know you said you have different personalities, but when you can fully just switch to the other language, like for me, when I speak Spanish, I'm not fully switched over to Spanish in my mind. There's still a part of my mind that's translating, that's working overtime in order to make the conversation work. Like I can't just switch and just have it be me speaking Spanish and me just fully comfortable as if I was speaking English. Whereas I feel like for you, like when you're speaking English, it doesn't seem like your mind is working overtime. Like this is just very natural to you, and that just people that are like that, oh my gosh, it amazes me.
I feel like there's a point when you learn a language and you get used to speaking another language where you stop translating words, and I feel like that's the point where you are like speaking. I don't know. I'm when people ask me, are you fluent? Are you bilingual? I'm like, I don't even know where you draw the line, but I guess. But yeah, I feel like the point where you stop translating from one language to the other, that's like really interesting. But sometimes now I have to translate back, like because I barely speak German unless I talk to someone at home. There are certain words that I don't use a lot in German where I don't, like the words requirements, I cannot think of the German word. I literally will have to type it in and look it up, and my parents are always like, oh my god, you're so freaking annoying. It's so funny.
Yeah,
like,
that happens.
How can that happen? How can you speak a language for so many years of your life and then you literally lose some words? I mean, it's wild.
It's also crazy because I have never thought of you as someone with an accent. I think I just have friends with like a wide ranging like voices. My friends have just lots of different voices, low voices, weird voices, I don't know. So
weird voices.
I never, like not weird, but just like quirky or just different types of intonation. So I never in a million years would have said, oh yeah, like Sarah has an accent. And then every once in a while we get someone on the podcast that's like, where are you from? And I'm like, how do they even hear, or how do they even notice?
Yeah,
because
but I feel like
for me,
also,
I don't hear it, but
I feel like if you are surrounded by a lot of people from different countries, which you are, you get so used to it, and it's so easy to understand all sorts of accents. And then sometimes people are like, yeah, I see it the other way around, where sometimes Americans have a hard time understanding someone with an accent, where I'm like so used to it, I know exactly what they're trying to say, but I'm so used to it. And like so is my partner, because he's bilingual too. So then to me it's like funny, I'm like, how am I understanding this better than you? It's not with everything. Like if someone's coming with like a thick Scottish accent, I'm out. Like I don't know what in the world is going on. Also there's some American accents that I'm not used to, where I'm like, wait, is this American or are you from somewhere else? Like I'm not sure for a second if that's American or if this is like some Australian accent, and then people are like, obviously that's American, and I'm like, that doesn't check out for me.
This is just such an interesting topic, because being on the reverse side of it, I think it really opened my eyes to how people get treated in the US all the time. Because being on the reverse side of it and speaking Spanish, where I feel like I'm doing amazing, I feel like I'm really saying the right thing, I'm doing my best, I'm pronunciating everything, whatever, and people will refuse to understand me because I have a super strong accent. People refuse to, it could be something so simple like, ¿Cómo estás? And they're like, ¿Qué? ¿Qué? They're like, what? And you're like, I know I have an accent, but work with me. I know that if you put like a little bit of effort into trying to, but on the flip side, when you like have never heard an American speaking Spanish and what that sounds like, or on the flip side, a Spanish speaking person speaking English, and you're not used to hearing that accent, it could be a little harder for you to understand. Yeah, so I kind of understand both sides. Yeah, but it's just like, really interesting.
The funniest part in my journey of being more fluent in English was there was a phase in my life where people would be like, where are you from? And I would be Germany, and they were like, wait, what? Is that a place in France? And I'm like, no, the country Germany. And people would think I would say Charbonnet, and I think it was like a time where there was like a movie where people were skiing there, and like everyone had that on their mind. And apparently I said it like, it happened to me probably 5 times, and I was like, are you telling me you cannot even understand which country I'm coming from? Like, I was out of it. I was like, I'm done with this, bye, never coming back. So hilarious. Like, that was the rock bottom. I was like, I'm never speaking again. This is so funny.
That is really funny.
Well, circling back, that was a tangent. How did we even come on here? Well, we were talking to someone from Canada today. I've recently figured out I now can spot the Canadian O. They say they have like a different O, and it's
I love the Canadian accent. I think it's so, like, I like it.
I love it too. And it's such a clear, crisp English, really easy to understand, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So today we're talking to
Andrew Lewin. He is host of a podcast called How to Protect the Ocean. And like we said, he's been doing it for 10 years. This is a podcast swap episode, which I forgot to say earlier on. But Andrew, in this episode, we talked to Andrew about how he got into podcasting in the first place, why he got into podcasting about the ocean, what it's been like for him these past 10 years, some of like the challenges that we have trying to do something in sustainability, like full-time. If you're like interested in entrepreneurial stuff and sustainability world, or you're interested in like how can we do ethical business vibes, we do talk about that stuff in this episode, so I think you will like it. And then Andrew interviewed us on his podcast, How to Protect the Ocean, which I believe he is planning to release the episode tomorrow, Wednesday, April 24th. So you can hear us get interviewed, which, to be honest, I feel like Sarah and I are sometimes like really good at getting interviewed. We're just good at it's just, everyone likes to talk about themselves, and sometimes it's really fun to talk about how it's been going with the podcast, our podcast, Ocean Stories, and the journey it's been, our goals for the future. All that stuff is really fun to talk about. So that is what we talked about on How to Protect the Ocean. It's been lovely to connect with Andrew. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to Ocean Stories. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting. I love this.
I know, it's so funny to see someone like you got the setup, you got the mic, like we're all ready to go. Tell us, where in the world are you right now?
Well, I live and I was born in Ontario, Canada. So I grew up in Toronto, in a suburb of Toronto. I now live just outside of Toronto in Burlington, a little bit of a smaller city. Which is ironic because I'm in love with the ocean, and I don't live by the ocean. I'm in central Canada, where we're surrounded by the Great Lakes, so we do have an attachment to the ocean, but not a saltwater body, just freshwater body, sweetwater body is what we call it. So, but definitely surrounded by water.
The Sweetwater. I said Sweetwater the other day because that's like the direct translation, and everyone was laughing. So I love that you just mentioned that.
It sounds better, right? Like freshwater is nice, but people are just like, oh, it's not as exciting as the ocean. Yeah, but when you say Sweetwater, like, oh, okay, that's actually kind of cool. Yeah, I heard it from somebody else.
That's so cool. I'm also happy. Not happy for you that you landlocked, but I feel like we talk a lot about how there's landlocked people that oftentimes lose their connection to the ocean. We have very little landlocked people on here because most people work in and around the ocean. How did you fall in love with the ocean, or what was your connection if you grew up landlocked? Like where was the point where you were like, oh, I love this and I want to learn more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a time where there wasn't any internet. Right. So we didn't have, I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s and 90s. And so internet until probably my late high school career, that's when internet started to come to my home. So I didn't really necessarily have access to sort of videos and pictures online to the ocean. A lot of it just came from TV, Jacques Cousteau, documentaries. It came from David Attenborough, BBC documentaries. And so just being able to see coral reefs and seagrass beds and sharks and dolphins and whales and things like that on TV, I was just like, I'm in love, right? I think it was also a little bit of, I can't have this all the time. Mm-hmm. So you're just like, I want to go there. I want to be there. I want to be around the ocean. We didn't necessarily have, like my family and I didn't necessarily have a lot of money to travel at that time. I think the first time I went and saw the ocean when I was 9 years old, and we went to Disney World, and then we went to Clearwater Beach in Florida, and that's the first time I actually touched the ocean. But again, I was just infatuated with it. I was, underneath the water all the time, looking for starfish and sand dollars and all that kind of stuff, and just loved to explore. But it really just came from TV, and watching those documentaries.
That's really cool because we talk a lot about how media and sharing the story, and now social media, but back in the days, documentaries, I guess still documentaries, can actually help to connect people that are landlocked to the water. So it's a good example that your whole love originated in like watching David Attenborough, for example. Same for me, honestly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he's educated generations of people, I think, at this point, right? I mean, that voice, his passion, you know, like you look at him compared to a lot of the people now, he doesn't fit the mold, you know, of TV. You know what I mean? And this is no slight against him, but like a lot of times when you see people on TV, they have to look a certain way. They have to be a certain way. He was just a naturalist who enjoyed what he loved, and you can hear it in his voice, and you can hear it, the passion in everything that he talked about, everything that he picked up, everything that, you know, on the videos, whatever he would do. It was just fun to listen to him, right? It's still fun to listen to him. I think that's like from my parents' generation to my kids' generation. Like he's just the best. I can't imagine his legacy, what it is right now, right? And what he expected when he first started.
And he's so calm. I feel like TV is so quick, and he's just so calm. He's definitely, if you can have dinner with one person, dead or alive, it's David for me. Bring him on.
Absolutely.
I know. Yeah. Next podcast guest.
Yes. That would be a great podcast guest. I think you would almost have to do like a Joe Rogan 3-hour episode to try and get everything in and not let that conversation stop, I think.
For sure. All of this makes a ton of sense knowing what we know about you. Did you go on to continue searching for information about the ocean at university?
Yeah, so I actually, believe it or not, there's a University of Guelph, which is in Ontario, was where I did my undergrad, and I went there because they had an amazing marine biology program, which is weird because it's in the middle of Ontario. It's farm country. It's known for its agricultural school, right, and a vet school. But at one point we had, I know this is kind of bad when you think about it, but back then we had dolphins. I wasn't there when it happened, but they had seals. They had like a facility for those and to study. Then they had like this aquatic lab where they had skates and they had fish and they would do experiments and they would do breeding and all that kind of stuff. But we had a lot of professors who were, you know, Canadian renowned and even world renowned in terms of each of their specialties. And so I went there. And so I didn't have to search as much at that point for information. Although I was still very curious in university, you know, trying to get in. I didn't necessarily have the marks to make it to the marine biology program directly. And so I had to go in a roundabout way, but I got there. You know, the drive for that got me there. And then I got to, you know, take all the courses. The one thing I always find interesting that people don't know about is that if you want to get into university, you don't always have to get in through the program that you need to get into. You know how like there's sometimes, and I don't know how it is in the US or in Europe. It's probably the same, right? Where it's like everybody has 90s, you know, and you know that's what becomes the marker to get in. And of course, the U.S. has the SATs. I don't know if Europe, Sarah, has any kind of qualifying exams, but for Canada, it's like it's your marks. When I went to school, we had OAC, so we had a grade 13, and those were your marks. You had to have 6 courses under there that had to qualify for the program you're going into. And so my program, I think it was like an 86, 87 average, but I couldn't get in to the program that I wanted. So I went through another program that you needed 75 to get in. So I more than qualified for that. And then I just took all the courses I needed to take because it was very similar. And so once you get a 70 average, I was able to transfer over and I had well above that. And so it was just one of those things where I was like, this is great. I didn't have to stress during high school. I mean, I stressed because you still want to get the highest marks, but I didn't have to go crazy and I got through. And I still got to learn everything that I needed to learn and still got to do the program that I wanted. So something that a lot of people don't really realize. It's not easy, but it's a way into what you want to do, you know, for the same price.
Yeah, that's definitely my experience too in university. I don't know if it's like that at all colleges, but I like talking about alternative paths to what you want to do because it isn't just like if you're not a biology, science, STEM person right away, there's other ways to get into that world. And then you have to become a biology person. Just kidding. I don't know because I didn't study that, but
right.
It's just what I assume. Kind of speaking from my own fears because I struggle with math. I like science, but I still struggle with technical aspects of research and stuff.
Right.
But anyways.
Well, I mean, with that said, there's a lot of people to do that, Lydia, too. I mean, I know a lot of people who have gone through the science and like they struggle. I mean, everybody struggles with math at that level. Everybody struggles with science at that level. It's not easy. It's not an easy program to go through, whether you're at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level. It's stressful. I've heard horror stories in certain cases for graduate work and so forth. Then I've heard other people having a great time. So it ranges, right? And it depends who you have, what school you go to, who's your supervisor, like the person's personality as well, and how well does it mesh with other graduate students and so forth. And it's not an easy field to follow. But with that said, it's a very large field. And I feel like that field has grown even more so since I graduated back in with my undergraduate back in 2001. And, you can go in if you look at any like executive director or anyone that's in management within a nonprofit organization, they rarely have a science background. They have a business background. Maybe they have an MBA. Maybe they have a psychology background. You look at every aspect of conservation, just the way conservation is going right now, even with research. Science does play an important role, but also knowing people and dealing with people, local communities, being sensitive to, everybody's perspective and making sure that everybody has a say and being aware of like ocean justice. And that wasn't even not necessarily a field, but it wasn't even talked about, when I graduated. And that's 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago. To see that now, to be able to have people in those fields and focusing on that to make conservation better is allowing more people to be a part of conservation, which is great because we do need more voices. We need more people from everywhere to be a part of that. So it's not just scientists that are part of like marine conservation. It's an important role, obviously, and it's still needed to be done, but it's a part of, that's a cog in the wheel, right?
Yeah, totally. We always say like
Very
whatever.
well said.
Yeah.
We couldn't agree more. Us two non-scientists talking about the ocean every day and learning new things all the time.
Yeah, whatever skill you have, the ocean needs it. That's the whole thing. So I'm curious, what are you doing now? Like, what is your job? You have a wonderful podcast set up, so we get some hints, but can you explain a little bit? It's because you're not actually living close to the ocean and diving every day. So what's your current situation, your job?
Oh, I wish I was diving every day. I wish I was living, like, just to be able to see the ocean every day. That would be great. I get to see a lake every day, and I love it. I think in the middle, like in Ontario and Central Canada, we take it for granted, the Great Lakes and how much we depend on them and just how much we should be using them more, and somebody growing up trying to be around the ocean all the time, and then, having to deviate from that throughout my life, I always took it for granted. And I feel like now at the age of 40, 46, 45, I don't even know how old I am. I'm like, when you're in your 40s, you don't even know how old you are. I think I'm 45. 45, and you're just like, now I truly appreciate them. I try and see it every day. I try and take my dogs down there every day and just, enjoy the sunrise or enjoy them playing in the water and stuff like that. They're any body of water is phenomenal. And I think, you get that. But to answer your question is, I like to say that I'm a science communicator. I'm an ocean science communicator, but that's not my full-time job. That's not what pays the bills. I work at a different job. I work for a software company as a customer success manager because that's what pays the job. But I always say that my full-time job is the podcast and science communication, and my side job that I get money that allows me to pay my bills is my 9-to-5 job. Because I work just as hard, if not harder, on the podcast than I do, in my regular job, because this is what I'm passionate about. And it allows me to do what I want, and that's something that a lot of people, like I've realized this at this point in my career. Like I've been a scientist for 20 years. I've worked for nonprofits. I've worked for, federal government of Canada as fisheries and oceans, in the fisheries and oceans department. I've worked for private consulting, environmental consulting. I've done all of that. I've been to the Arctic. I've been to the Gulf of Mexico. I've done research in the Atlantic. Like I've been able to travel quite a bit, within North America and do some pretty cool things. Like it's been a lot of fun. I do science communication. I was led to science communication due to lifestyle choices. And so I'm married. I have kids. My family, their grandparents, my kids' grandparents, my parents, my in-laws, and my brother-in-law and my brother, they're in the area. And we made that choice together. Took a while to make that choice, to be honest, because I always thought, oh yeah, as soon as I graduate, I'm out, but I met the love of my life, and we decided together to live here, to have our kids grow up here, because it was a good place for us, and never regret the decision. It just leads you to a different path. It makes your career as a marine biologist a lot more difficult, and so you have to adapt. And that's one thing that I've been able to do, is adapt. Private consulting and being able to go to the Arctic, I can do that out of Ontario. I worked at a place just down the street from me that allowed me to do that. I did go to Halifax and moved to Halifax to do my graduate work at Acadia University for 2 years. And then we moved back, had kids, got married, had kids. And then, now they're teenagers. I couldn't even imagine moving now, two teenage girls moving halfway through university or through high school. That would be killer for them. So, but I enjoy what I do. I mean, with the technology that we have, remote interviews, and be able to talk to people all over the world about science and about telling the stories. And that's where I found, I was working for the federal government, earning a great paycheck. The only problem was I wasn't working. I never felt I had I was making a significant contribution in my eyes. And so I just wasn't happy. So I decided to look for something else. It didn't work out. I ended up working on my own for a while. And then I just kind of looked around and be like, what do I love to do? And podcasting is what I love to do. I've been doing it for almost 10 years. And this is something that I found I've had the most change. I've been able to affect the most change. And so I've had people, and you two, the two of you will probably have the same thing over time as your podcast grows, is you get people who listen to you who have never necessarily been exposed to the ocean or never really understood the impacts of what people are facing through the stories that you're telling. I mean, it's in the name. It's a perfect name, Ocean Stories, right? And people identify with stories. And so through those stories, you're going to inspire people. And that's what I've had. I've had people come up to me. I've had a person come up to me that went back to university to do her PhD because she was stuck in a job that she didn't like, and she was listening to the podcast all the time, and it inspired her to make that change to go back, which is a pretty big change. Going from like a full-time job to like a graduate student again is a huge, huge change and a huge sacrifice. And now, she's doing her PhD. I've had somebody in Australia who was like a plumber, and he listened to the podcast, fell in love with the story, and realized that plastic pollution was a huge problem. Started a nonprofit organization to do beach cleanups, and literally changed his life. And so now he's doing beach cleanups as an organization in Australia. Like, you don't really understand the impact that you have by sitting in an office or sitting in your bedroom or wherever and speaking into a mic, either by yourself or interviewing people, until people start to connect with you and engage with you and be like, you changed my life. Like, you did this for me. Once you get that, it's addictive, right? And now it's like, I want to change everybody's life. I want to change the behavior of everybody. And so that's why I do it. That's my motivation to continue to do that. So, very long story. This is a podcaster's answer, but I'm doing podcasting full time, I like to say, and then I pay my bills through my 9 to 5.
You mentioned so many things. I don't even know where to start here, but first of all, I love that you have transparently shared that you make your money on the site, because I feel like what's a little bit discouraging in nowadays in the social media is like, it looks like everyone just has it figured out and just lives off whatever they're doing, and then you start something and you're like, why do I not make like $100,000 from my little situation in here? And a lot of people are not necessarily hiding, but I feel like a lot of people are not talking about all the jobs they've done and all the sidekicks that they had and how much passion goes into it. So that's cool that you just shared that, because I feel like we're confronted with that quite a lot too, where people are like, I don't know, it feels like people assume that this is our job, which, spoiler alert, it's not our job. It's just full on.
Well, wouldn't it be great if it was, though? Like, wouldn't it be amazing?
Would be so amazing. And hopefully one day we'll get there. Like, that's the goal. But for now, it's not.
Well, and I'll tell you, here's the thing. With any kind of digital content creation, you know, there's a space for it. People want to hear it. But it's like, what do you do to make the money, right? And to have a frank conversation about it, it's something that I've been thinking about for the last 10 years. And especially when you're doing an ocean science podcast or an ocean conservation podcast, you know, whatever your niche is, if it's education or something like that, you're professing that, you know, the ocean's important and we need to save it. Okay. Let's look at let's look at the monetization way, like the ways you can monetize, you know, podcasting or digital creation. The biggest thing is sponsors, right? Let's look at the major companies that sponsor. They're all wasteful. Everything is wasteful, right? Beauty products. Look, I'm a guy. I identify as a man. I don't use beauty products. I use lotions and things like that. But even then, how many awful chemicals are in like lotions and things like that get sold and hawked online that people will, you know, companies will pay people to do and influencers to do. And I have no problem with them doing that. But is it really good for the environment? Like for me as an ocean podcast, can I do that? I don't, like, ethically, I can't do that, right? There's a lot of other products out there that you have to do the research. And you're like, is this the best for my audience? Like, I'm telling my audience that we should be using less, you know, using less single-use plastic. Well, most of the things that are online are single use. And so it's like, is this really the way? And some companies that I work with are trying to get better. And so I support them in that. But they're not paying like all of my bills, you know? And so the sponsorship, you got the ethical part of what can you sell from a physical product to, is it enough to actually sell? Like, do you have enough, you know, enough downloads? Do you have a big enough audience for it to make that, you know, where you can quit your job, you know, and you can pay your bills, right? That's sort of the ideal. If you can do this full time, you want to quit your job that you're doing now, maybe, depending on what you do. Or, you know, you want to be able to say, I want to be able to pay my bills through this so I don't have to worry. So that there's that aspect. There's other things like selling, you know, like selling your own product or your own digital course or some kind of information. And that's sort of where I feel is the best way. But what do you sell to an audience that's just looking for information? Right. A lot of it's just like, oh, that was good to know. I don't know. So there's ways you can do it. Like you can partner with products that are more eco-friendly, support those small businesses, some startups maybe, and have that information, maybe some charities, but they're not going to pay you because they don't have the money to pay you. Right. And so it's a very complex thing to make money. There's a way. I'll find it. There's a way. You know, but it's you find it as a collective, right? So that's why, like, you know, when I first heard of your podcast and I saw it through Carissa's podcast, Sustainability and Me, I was like, okay, I have to reach out. The more we talk to each other, the more we, you know, put our heads together, the more we support each other, the better we are as a collective, like as a podcasting community, as a science communication community, whether it's through YouTube, whether it's through, you know, audio podcasts or, you know, TikTok or Instagram, whatever that might be. There's ways to make money. There's ways to make this as a legitimate business. It's just, how do we do it? It's new. Nobody's really done it before. We're in a creator economy. It's just a matter of like what fits the narrative for ocean conservation that's ethically right. Right, where we're not all hypocrites and saying, yeah, well, hey, you know, like I just partnered with a private jet company because they just paid me a boatload of money, you know, $100,000. Now I can fly all over to all these conferences. Well, do I need to do that? No, like that's against what I say, you know. So you have to be cognizant of that. So I try and talk about that a lot when I talk on the podcast about that.
I mean, you are preaching to the choir. I have so many thoughts swirling around in my head, but that is definitely something that we talk about a lot and try to consider because we are very, you know, not anti-consumption, but anti-overconsumption.
Yeah.
And thinking about, well, if we're going to say to people that they need to buy something, it better be something that, you know, has a full circle life or like, where is it going after they're done? Or is this something they really need? And it's things we're thinking about all the time. And I also love that you talked about having the impact. Those stories were amazing of the plumber and the other person. I just feel like if you can have that type of impact on one person, it makes it so worth it. And even in the small interactions we've had with people where people have said, I really like this, it made me think of something I didn't think of before, like that kind of keeps you going. And I'm sure that's kept you going over the past 10 years of podcasting.
100%. It's one of those things where sometimes you need the motivation. As you are well aware in starting this journey, this is tough. This is tougher than everybody thinks when they first go into it. I remember my first episode that I recorded, I was in my office. I felt uncomfortable. I was by myself, like talking to myself, it felt like. I had to record it 3 times because I kept messing up, like in terms of, I forgot to record that one. That was 45 minutes later, I realized that. Or, that happened twice. I had to record it three different times. I was like, this is ridiculous. This is a lot harder than I thought. You lose data sometimes, you lose a recording, or, you forget to record when a guest is recording and you have to ask them to re-record and, take up more of their time. I've stayed up till 2-3 in the morning trying to figure some stuff out when I first started. And it's difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. And so you want to make sure that you get the benefit. So when people reach out and be like, hey, I really appreciate it. Like say somebody hasn't reached out in a while and you're like, am I actually, influencing anybody? I haven't heard from anybody. I always ask people to message me, and then you get a message and you're just like, this was awesome. I needed this. Like I really needed this right now. You get a lot of people with climate anxiety, or you get a lot of people with ocean anxiety and what's going to happen to our world. And then you listen to some of the stories that we cover through podcasting, and then you're just like, I feel better. Like, thank you for that. And you're just like, that makes my day right there. That makes my day, as you'll both discover as well.
I feel like we recently got to the point, because we were pretty new still. I feel like we've been doing this for maybe 3 months. And at this point, like, we slowly are getting messages from people none of us know. I'm always like, Lydia, is this your friend? Because in the beginning, it's like your mom, your aunt, your friends, everyone. Right. And then now we get to the point where we're both like, okay, I don't know this person. Then Lydia's like, I don't know this person. We're like, yes, someone is actually listening from the outside world. So funny. And actually DMing us after saying something super nice. And just like you said, we are literally always screaming when that happens, because sometimes it's so abstract. Even though you see the numbers, I'm always assuming it's just all my cousins, it's my entire family, there's no one from the outside world as part of this. And then you find out, well, no, they're actually not listening anymore, which is totally fine. They're not the target audience. And then it's new faces, which is so exciting. But we've just recently hit that point, and it's amazing.
Well, congrats, because that's not an easy point to get. A lot of people will start, and I'm not sure if you've heard that term, but they pod fade. So after seven episodes, they don't get what they want, or they don't get the level that they want or that they expected, and then they're just like, this isn't worth it. This is a lot more work than I anticipated, and so I'm going to stop. My biggest advice for people when they first started in podcasting, and I'm a podcast manager for a number of different podcasts, like in and outside the field, and I just keep going, because you'll see those. They'll come at the most unexpected time, but just keep going, and because that's what we need to, right? That's when it comes down to it. When you look at the message, we need to tell more ocean stories, and that's really what it comes down to.
I love that you talked about finding a community solution about how we can make telling these stories like more personally sustainable for our lives. It made me think about storytelling at large, and not just about the ocean. It could be anything. Recently, I've just been thinking about how independent media, it sounds so stupid to say that, but independent media is really important, and relational storytelling is really important. Hearing from people that you don't see on the news, getting away from those big news, it's all crazy. Yeah. You get what I'm trying to say.
100%.
Coming together and thinking, how can we make this type of media something that people can actually afford to dedicate their time to doing? There's so many ideas that I'm sure you have, that we have, that we would love to bring people, that would bring them, basically free resources, information, meetups, all different ideas that we have, that if we had the resources and ability to do them, we could. But unfortunately right now, when you have to do different jobs and this and that. So I just love the idea of slowly, as we progress down this timeline of talking to each other and figuring out what can we do to make it so that these stories, and not just ocean stories, all different types of stories, are available to people in a more economically sustainable way? I just love that.
Yeah, and to be honest, like I've seen it happen outside. So in Canada, there's this, I guess a company you would call it, but an independent sort of journalistic company that is called Canada Land. And it started off as a podcast, and they have a number of different podcasts, but they fund everything through Patreon. They have like a dedicated Patreon. Now they cover media. So there is like, here are the big stories. And then they also cover like what's big in media, what's happened in media, like what shut down. Like, so just recently, like last week, Bell Media, which is like a big, it's kind of like NBC, things like that in Canada. They just shut down. They just laid off like 10% of their people. But a lot of it was like one of the most important, like one of the, I guess not necessarily most important, but it was like it's called W5H. It was a show that just like an investigative reporting show. They shut that down. They shut down, like there's no newscasts on, weekends anymore. Like, cause they said they didn't have the money to pay the people to do that. Yet their executives are making, $12 million a year, and so you're looking at what's happened is they've bought up everybody. And they're all under one, or they're under 2 or 3 different companies. And then they make their corporations. So they make these cuts where they're like, well, yeah, we don't really care about this. We don't really care about this. We don't really care about this. But they're important to the Canadians. And so you have this, independent organization called Canada Land, and they fund everything through Patreon. And so they'll come in, and they only fundraise once a year, and that's for the month of November. And they just like, if you want this, so they're like, if you want this podcast, so they have a series. They have like a network. If you want this podcast, this is how much it's going to cost. We need to fundraise for this. So if we get to this point, then we will put this through. So it's basically paid for by the people. So we're going to find different ways to do it. So it was all through crowdfunding, and it was all just this stubbornness of like, we're not going to let up as long as we can get money from our audience and provide for our audience what they want. Then we get it. And to be honest, from an ocean perspective, I feel like that's the way forward in a lot of the ways, is like as a collective, we provide a specific, message, right? That people want to hear based on science, based on policy, just what's happening and how we can do better, and the good projects that are going on that you won't see on NBC, Fox, CBS, BBC, things like that, right? Because they're busy covering other things, specific niche-based ocean stories, ocean storytelling, conservation, science, whatever that might be. To be able to fund that, you need to find the people who are willing to fund that, the brands to put behind it, but also the people to put behind it. And it starts off slow, but it's like you kind of have to do it. And I think that's what it's going to take, like the stubbornness that, no, you don't stop, because we need to do it,
I mean, you've had 10 years of experience as a podcaster doing science communication. I want to know, like, what are your biggest takeaways from being in this world of science communication? And I want to know how you got there in the first place, but then this is going to turn into that 3-hour series.
I think the way I started, just quickly, was I actually started before the podcast. I started with the website, and I started it because my friends and family did not know anything about the ocean. I remember I had a family member come up to me. He's like, so is this climate change thing really that big? And this was in like 2008, 2009. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you do not know? What do you mean you don't know? This guy was a smart person. I still, like, I hold all the respect for him. Just, he wasn't aware, and when you start to hear that, you're like, there's a concern here that the people in my own circles don't know the severity of climate change, the severity of like plastic pollution, the severity of overfishing, because we're not exposed to it all the time. And that's when, social media really started to come into play. And so there's all this, what I call distractions from like sort of learning about the planet. And I was like, I I've always been like, if somebody's not going to do it, I'm going to do it. And there were people out there doing it. deepseanews.com, southernfriedscience.com, a number of other places, websites were doing a really great job. But I was like, no, I need to do this. I need to take it up. So I went through a number of different iterations. I tried blogging, didn't really like it. I tried YouTube when I first tried it. I had toddlers. It was really difficult to dedicate the time to it, plus working a full-time job. And then I went to, somebody introduced me to podcasting. And as soon as I tried it, I was like, this is amazing. The second thing that I learned that was probably the most important is I was very fearful of what the science community would feel about what I had to say. That was like my biggest fear. And it still becomes my fear. And I can see, Lydia, your reaction. It looks like that's your fear as well, maybe. That's what it was. And so I was just like, I'm worried about what people think. And I was covering like science articles and things like that, and like supporting them, being like, oh, I just found this really cool article that I think you need to know. And we would go through it. And then I started, one of the articles that we covered on the podcast was by a guy who was the director of communications for the International Marine Conservation Congress for Society of Conservation Biology. And he reached out to me. He's like, are you coming to the conference in Newfoundland? And I was like, I wasn't planning on it, but sure. And he goes, you can do interviews here. I'll set you up with a bunch of different interviews. I've got the keynote speakers. I've got, there's a lot of speakers going. And so I went there. And then when I got there, people recognized my voice just from the podcast. They were listening. I had no idea who was listening at that point. I didn't have it was a year into the podcast. I didn't tell many people about it because I was so afraid about what people would think. And then people were like, we love your podcast. We listen to it all the time. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. I even I did a session on podcasting for the environment. And when I did it, I had the opening slide was my symbol, like my cover art. And somebody walked in that had nothing to do with the conference. And she's from Newfoundland. And she walked in and she's like, I listened to that podcast on the way here. Like, that's the power of podcasting. You have no idea who's going to listen, and you have no idea why they're listening, but all of a sudden they're listening and they're around you, and you don't even know about it. And so, I feel like that's sort of what I've learned. The other thing is like, the third thing is like, you just never know what opportunities are going to come from podcasting. I've had job offers. I've been flown to Malaysia to cover a conference. And there's just, it's crazy. And the people I've met, the opportunities I've had just from the people I've met have been just enormous. So that's sort of what the three major things that I really learned.
Business highlight.
A major issue with a lot of the biggest sunscreen and body care brands is that they are formulating their products with harmful chemicals that are dangerous for human health. We're talking potential carcinogens. We're talking endocrine disrupting chemicals that are hurting human health, that hurt oceans and the marine life that live in them. We have discovered a brand that we're absolutely obsessed with that is working to combat this problem.
Stream to Sea is one of the only brands that is EWG tested, which is a really strict testing for skincare products to make sure that it's reef safe, ocean safe, human safe, and they passed all those things. So their products are 100% clean. We started using almost all their stuff, and we are literally diehard fans and obsessed. It just feels so good to wear something that is totally safe for you and totally safe for the ocean. They have a wide range of sunscreen, which I love all of them, honestly, but my favorite one is the glitter one. It's so cool. Also love their leave-in conditioner, their body lotion. What's your favorite product?
I really like to use their leave-in conditioner. It smells amazing, even though it's fragrance-free. And I also really like their body shampoo 2-in-1. I used to be a non-believer in 2-in-1s, but I actually really like the way this smells and the way it makes my body and hair feel. On the podcast, we talk a lot about supporting brands that are better for us and better for the environment, and Stream to Sea really embodies that. It's a woman-owned brand. Everything is made in the United States. They're based in Florida, and they're always trying to make new products that are safe for us and safe for the environment.
If you're convinced and you want to try Stream to Sea, make sure to use Ocean Stories at checkout to get 10% off and to support our show. Back to the episode.
Interesting lessons, especially for us because we're just starting this journey. I did make a face at the science communication thing because I do think that that's one of my major goals right now is to stop being afraid. Just feel like we live in a little bit cancel-y culture, a little bit, like hyper aware of everything. And I'm really trying to, for myself and for how I look at other people, you don't have to know everything. We're all learning things. And it's okay if you say something wrong. It's okay if you say something a little bit incorrect. We're all learning as we go along and trying our absolute best. We strive to say everything 100% correct, obviously, but it gets to a spot where, I am literally afraid to say certain sentences because of, someone could interpret it like this, someone could interpret it like that. And so I think that's a fear with any type of public facing content that you do, but it made me feel very seen when you said that.
Well, look, I've been wrong before and people have called me out, and as much as you hate it, like I hate being called out for stuff. I hate being wrong. I try and do as much research as possible. But a lot of times I'm doing 3 episodes a week. So I try and churn them out pretty quickly. And so I do try and do I try and use my history, my knowledge, my experience, and be like, is this really right? Is this not right? First, just a very, very recent example. The orcas that were stuck in the ice in Japan. So, they were stuck for 6 hours. They were found by researchers by drone footage. There's about 13 of them. They looked in pretty big distress. Nobody really knew what was going to happen to them. It usually makes pretty big news. And then they went back later. They found them a little bit more north of where they were sighted for before. And then, they went back again and they disappeared. So it was just, the articles came out, they've escaped. And people are on videos, influencers are like, they've escaped. It's great to see that they've escaped. You just don't know. Nobody saw them. They just literally disappeared. And so I kind of read the articles and I did a podcast episode about, hey, they've been presumed to escape, kind of leaving it open. And it's been it's happy that they haven't we haven't found their bodies or they haven't died or anything like that. Knowing full well that they could have, right? It's a definite possibility. We don't know how long they were stuck there in the first place. We don't know a lot. Well, I put it on my newsletter, I put it out, every weekday. And somebody, called me out on it. Be like, well, how do you know what's presumed mean? Have they seen them alive? Have they, do they know it's that pod? If they have seen them and stuff. And I'm like, it's a great question. I don't know. I guess presumed they're probably making a hopeful story. They think it's great, but they could have just as easily have drowned and just sunk to the bottom, or they're floating underneath an ice floe right now. You have no idea. We don't have an idea. So I put out a video on my YouTube channel being like, did these orcas escape? That's the question. And I'm like, I don't know. That's what we, as science, as someone as a science communicator, the ocean story here would be great if they escaped. But the science in me is no, they could have died. We have no idea where they are, and it's that balancing, obviously you balance the whole story, but it's also, you want to make it uplifting a little bit, especially with ocean optimism and things like that. So fully in the wrong there, where I didn't really come out and say on the podcast, be like, they may have died. We don't really know. But then it's you got it. So you just have to be careful, but you also have to swallow your pride sometimes and just be like, I was wrong. Or what I said could have been, seemed misleading. And that's part of being a journalist, although I don't have any journalism background. That's part of being a scientist, is you get critiqued, you take it on the chin, and you just be like, yeah, you're right. I probably shouldn't have said.
I sure do hope that those orcas survived.
Me too. Me too.
Oh man.
Because there were a couple of calves in there too, and orcas need our help as much as anybody.
Can you tell a little bit more about your podcast and how you set it up? Do you interview people, or do you have episodes on your own? You just said that you're releasing 3 episodes a week. Just for our listeners who might be interested and definitely should check out your podcast as well. What's going on?
Yeah, so the podcast is called How to Protect the Ocean. I also co-host another one called Beyond Jaws, which I'll talk about in just a sec. I do 3 episodes a week. It's a mix. So a lot of it is solo, what I call solo episodes, where it's just me talking about some. So it's, when I say my podcast, I say welcome to How to Protect the Ocean podcast. This is where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up with the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean. So Mondays is ocean awareness, basically. Wednesdays is like how you can speak up, so what you can do. So I go and I dive into a lot of science communication just through my journey. And then Fridays is usually like I'll have like a company on as an interview, or I'll talk about something that people have done or what we could do, sort of like an action item. And it kind of varies. Sometimes it gets mixed up a little bit just based on like if a story needs to get out, I'll do it on that day. But I just like doing 3 episodes a week. I've been changing it up since I started. I started off with 1 interview a week. Then I went to 5 episodes a week where 1 was an interview, and I did 5 episodes a week. Then I went, and those were 45 minutes long each. And then I went back to 3, and then I went to 7 because I was doing it full time for about a year and a bit. And you learn from the different frequencies. You learn what to expect from different frequencies. I went back to 3 times a week when I got a job, and I needed to pay some bills, and so now I do 3 times a week, and I absolutely love it.
Are there like episodes that are more popular than others? Like, do you see it in your statistics that you're like, okay, people tend to crave the awareness episodes or the interviews?
Usually it's by topic, and it just depends on like if it's something, usually with whales, it usually goes up. The people like whales, like dolphins, sharks. They'll like the iconic species. Sea turtles is usually a pretty good one. One of my most downloaded episodes was when I did an interview with Dr. Naomi Rose, and we talked about like the science of blackfish when that came out. Because when Blackfish came out, I was obviously, as you probably know, it had such a huge influence on, whales in captivity in general, but especially orcas in captivity. And the science got, like SeaWorld came out and just started battering the science behind it. And so Dr. Naomi Rose was a science advisor on the film, and she's got a ton of experience with orcas in the wild as well as in captivity. And she came on the podcast and just killed it. Like every time I have her on the podcast, the downloads are high because she brings such great information. But especially that, because it was such a popular movie, people wanted to know more about it. And so I had pretty good downloads. It still remains one of my top downloads, for the podcast. But I have I just published yesterday, episode 1567. So I've been doing this for a long time, right?
Whoa. That is dedication.
Yeah.
Seriously, you are so dedicated. That is really inspiring.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, I love this. Like if I could do this full time, I would put out an episode every day because I love telling the stories. I love people having access. I love the fact that it's a podcast and I have people from over 100 countries listening. And that makes me feel good because it's accessible to everybody. If you don't want to listen, you don't have to listen to it. People enjoy that they're constantly getting their information from it. And I just try and, the passion that I have, I try and share it with everybody else. Right.
Love that. Super inspiring. I told Sarah, and we've talked about this, we're doing it to the grave.
There you go.
But we're going to keep going because a lot of people have told us, a lot of people give up because you don't see, the ocean miraculously healing from climate change after you start, and it's a little bit depressing. But we're going to keep at it. And so that's very inspiring words.
Well, and thank you. I appreciate that. And you're right. If you even talk to anybody who's been in marine science or conservation for, like, say they're close to retirement compared to when they first start, there's a definite difference in their attitudes towards, when you're early career, you get this hope that you can change the world, that you can have an effect. And then when you're late career and you're on the verge of retirement, you're frustrated because all the stuff that you wanted to do or could have done was kiboshed by politicians, superiors, organizations, because it didn't fit the narrative or, for whatever reason. Right. And so it doesn't just happen in podcasting, right? It happens, throughout any kind of career. You look at anybody who's been around any kind of career, lawyers who have been around for a while, anybody, they've seen a lot. Things have gone their ways, things haven't gone their way. And I think when you break it down, and I think this is the biggest thing, the biggest message that I like to tell people, because ocean conservation is complex. It's extremely complex. It covers, 3/4 of the world. Everybody depends on it and everybody uses it. So you're managing people, right? You're not managing the ocean. The ocean's going to be fine after we're all gone. If the human species disappeared tomorrow, the ocean will be fine. It'll evolve and it'll change, but it'll be fine. It's us, the human species that has to change, and that has to just kind of be aware that there are bigger things in our lives that we have to take care of. This planet, we are, for better or for worse, we are in charge of this planet. We have the most influence on this planet. It's not going to be easy because we're all different. Even within our species, we're different cultures, different backgrounds, different parts of the world, different thoughts on the world. Even like here within Canada, you have different ways of running the country and running our natural resources. That's a big split, right? We usually conservative liberal when we get into the politics of it. It's even more split than it's ever been. And so it's so complex to get into this human psyche to change our behaviors. We are not a species who likes to change. And so we need to change. And so it's the long run. And this is why I remember when I did that podcast session at IMCC4 in Newfoundland, somebody asked me a question, a good friend of mine asked me a question in front of everybody. She's like, why are you telling other people to do podcasting? Like, don't you want the downloads? Don't you want to be known as the guy? I'm like, no, I want the ocean to be better. And to do that, we need more people podcasting. We need more people on YouTube, more people on TikTok and Instagram, more people telling their stories from all over the world, right? And so if I'm able to facilitate that, or if I have, that's the legacy that I want to leave, is to support and get everybody out there talking. The more people we're talking, the more we can change, right? And change our behaviors. And that's the way I see it being done.
Yeah, and just like you said, I feel like especially in the ocean community, everyone is very welcoming. Like, we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into. We were just like, let's just do this ocean podcast. We were super inspired. And everyone, it really feels like everyone is trying to unite and just get something better out of it. And not a single person was like, even close to saying like, oh, why you having another ocean podcast, like, why? Well, we're technically competitors. There's no such thing. So
no,
I feel like that's what makes it even more special.
Yeah, 100%. It's that collaboration. I mean, science and conservation and sustainable businesses, it's all done through collaboration. We have to stick together because we're such a small, I feel like sometimes we're such a small minority in the grand scheme of things. And so we just need to stick together and support each other on the way up, right?
Yeah.
Whatever success is defined as.
Exactly.
That's the way we do it.
And it's such a bubble. Sometimes I'm like, well, everyone is looking for sustainable products all the time, and then you just surround yourself with people that are doing that,
yep.
And it's easy to forget that that's the minority.
Yeah, exactly. Like I talk to my kids all the time. I got 2 young teenagers, and they want to compete with their friends with the clothes that they wear. And I look at some of the clothes, I'm like, yeah, they're cheap, but they're not sustainably made. Should we not go for more sustainable brands? And you look at the expense of those and you're like, can we afford those sustainable brands for 2 growing children? Is that actually possible? And will they wear it? And that, like, it's a lot of, I think the one thing that a lot of people like to do is call out people like ourselves, people who want to do better. And like, well, your phone was made from, petroleum products and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, but wouldn't it be nice if it wasn't? Wouldn't it be nice if the clothes I bought, from different companies at the mall or whatever that I can actually afford? Wouldn't it be nice that if that was actually sustainable and that there's a circular economy around it? Wouldn't it be great if that actually happened? Why can't we strive for that? Why is it so bad to strive for that? Mm-hmm. I always tell the people like that, like, you're so like smug in telling people this, where they're just like, well, your phones and your clothes that you wear and your shoes, they're all bad for the environment. I'm like, yeah, that's what we're trying to change.
This has been top of mind, and I just really am happy that you highlighted that. With electric cars, this has been like totally my back and forth, because I'm like, yeah, electric cars, right? And then there's so many issues and problems with electric cars, and problems with the batteries, and human rights issues, and like actual sustainable, like, can we grow this and can we scale this issues? But it's like, wouldn't it be nice if we could just all have electric cars that are coming from all renewable energy, and the grid was strengthened and it was reliable and there was all this positive aspects? Like, I understand that it's not happening right now.
It's not perfect.
It's not the reality. You can't, you know, the range of the cars isn't perfect, and it's not good for people in different states and all of this. I know, like, I'm not saying, you know, throw your car out the window, but it would be awesome if we could figure these things out. So I really like that mindset. I'm gonna keep that.
Well, and even if even like another way to switch that conversation on EVs, because somebody told me this a while ago. I was like, when gas powered vehicles came out, you know, when we were all riding on horses and stuff, and cars starting to come out, people hated them. There were problems. It didn't have the range. You couldn't go far on a tank of gas. You know, they broke down all the time. Wheels would fall off. You know, engines would explode. Well, I mean, no, like compared to horses, yeah, it's like people didn't like cars. It was the change, right? And like you have people now, and like I always love getting into conversations with people who are like so anti, you know, EVs. It's an alternative. Is it perfect? No. Are there a lot of the worst thing of all this obviously is the human rights violations, like in places like the Congo and things like that, to mine these batteries. But the advances that we've made in the past 15 years on the batteries, on the battery life, on how the batteries are made, and the advances that we're going to be making in the future is huge compared to what we've done in the past. We're going to, like, the new batteries rely less on those specific metals that are happening. And we're going to get to a point, I strongly believe, where we're not even going to have to rely too much on those metals, right? And so I think what's happening is you have this technology that can seriously reduce our climate change, our sort of like greenhouse gas emissions from just regular usage. You know, the emissions that are emitted while using a gas-powered vehicle compared to an EV is like, you know, day and night. And so the amount of greenhouse gases that we're saving on, that we're not emitting, is huge when you're looking at EVs. The technology will get better, and we have to work to get it better. There's no doubt. Nothing's perfect when it comes like right off the bat. And so we need to continue with that.
You know, I'm super interested in leading a lifestyle that causes like the least amount of harm to other people. Sometimes in reality, it's a bit more difficult than you would like it to be.
Yeah.
But it's about like taking steps towards that as much as I can with my life. Sarah is back from her little technical moment.
Who knows what's going on here? Well, our last question is, what is your favorite ocean story or ocean memory? Now that you have a podcast, it can also maybe be like your favorite thing you've learned from someone else, or your favorite ocean conversation. But honestly, whatever comes up to your mind.
That is a great question. So like for ocean memory, I think is when my first job out of school, like for the oceans, I was living in Louisiana and I was working in the Gulf of Mexico. And to be able to be on a boat in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico in like glass type water, you know, where it's perfectly calm and you're watching a sunset or a sunrise, like it doesn't get better to be there. And just to be out on the ocean, you have that wonderful smell of the salt water. You're in the middle, like you can't see land anywhere, and it's dead calm. You know, you get to see, like, there's that, and like, I mean, there's so many things about being on the ocean that is memorable. Seeing like the bioluminescence, you know, churn up in the back of the stern of a boat when you're going to pick up somebody. It was just being on that ocean was absolutely wonderful. The favorite ocean story, there have been a lot of them. It's really difficult because I've covered so many that have been helpful for people. I mean, one of my favorite ones was learning about the Keiko story, you know, Free Willy, And so Dr. Naomi Rose told me this story just of his release and when he went to Iceland and how he survived. It was really the first orca where they took from captivity and put into sort of like a bigger captivity, but back into the ocean. And his journey from that, learning to feed on his own, interacting with other animals, strange animals, having like a larger sort of area to swim in, and then going out finally on his own and going away from where he was sort of kind of kept, and being able to go out and not coming back and being able to kind of survive on his own. And then obviously, he eventually passed away, a few years later. It's an incredible story because everybody's just been like, well, we can't put it back because, water pollution and it's the ocean and he's not used to it because they're like born there and all this kind of stuff. Kind of gives you hope that, no, we could put these amazing, intelligent and emotionally aware animals back into the ocean, and they will be fine. They may die earlier than they would in an aquarium because they're not used to it, and whatever psychological torture that we've put them through, it has affected them, but we could put them back and they could be normal again. That kind of gives me hope. And on the other end, we've also done a lot. I've also been able to be a part of a lot of podcasts that had to do with ocean justice, inclusivity, women's rights within the organization, like within marine biology and conservation. And so that's been important to me to be able to share those stories and help, forward sort of like the way we treat each other within the field. And so that's something that's really important to me.
Is the episode still up that you just talked about? Can people still listen to it?
Yeah. Well, all 1,567 episodes are up. That number, I'll try and I'll look for it and send you the links to it so that you can. But all of those are still up. You can
amazing.
You can go back
I want to listen to it.
Yeah, we will put the link to your podcast in the description for people to check out. Awesome. And of course, your other information, so people can go follow you and see what's up.
Oh, I love it. I think, ladies, this has been so much fun. I've really enjoyed this, and congratulations on launching and then just continuing on. I'm looking forward to having you on my podcast, both of you, and to be able to dive deep into your story and what you've learned so far, and the hopes and dreams of the podcast. And like I said before, this is not easy work. It takes a lot of time, and I know you both have other things that you do at the same time, and so I definitely empathize with where you're coming from, but I respect the mission and to get more stories out there, and I think that's really important, and I think a lot of people are going to resonate with that. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Ocean Stories. If you'd like to follow along on Instagram, you can find us at oceanstories_podcast for updates and behind the scenes.
We'll also be sharing our ocean adventures on YouTube at Ocean Stories Podcast. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
Join us next Tuesday for more Ocean Stories.